We live in a world where strength is celebrated, but vulnerability is disguised. Where bold gestures get recognition, but subtle truths go unnoticed. And when it comes to love, real, raw, gut-wrenching love, it rarely shows up dressed in roses and poetry. No, it hides. It battles itself. And most of the time, it shows up in forbidden ways, quiet, complicated, and utterly revealing. Because love, real love, doesn't always walk through the front door. Sometimes it sneaks in through the side, wearing the disguise of resistance, denial, or even anger. So let's rip off the veil. Let's decode what's happening beneath the surface. Here are 6 behaviors that scream, "I'm in love," even if it's never spoken aloud. There's a particular kind of silence that settles in after moments of deep intimacy, a silence that doesn't feel cold or empty, but confusing. It's the kind of silence that arrives right after passion, right after skin has met skin, and 2 bodies have melted into one. You look over expecting closeness to draw him in, but instead there's a shift. A slight distance, a pulling away, and suddenly you're left wondering, did something go wrong? Was the connection just in your head? But what if the withdrawal wasn't about losing interest, but about feeling too much? What if the act of being so physically close, so emotionally naked, sent him into a state of emotional freefall he never learned how to handle? This kind of post-intimacy distance is one of the most misunderstood behaviors in relationships. It can feel like rejection, abandonment, even manipulation, but in reality, it's often a deeply vulnerable, unspoken reaction to emotional overwhelm. Because here's the truth, when someone is secretly in love, physical intimacy becomes more than just a pleasurable experience. It becomes a mirror that reflects how much they care, how deeply they're affected, and how utterly unprepared they are to navigate those feelings. When 2 people connect sexually, something primal is triggered, yes, but something deeply emotional gets unlocked too. Especially when the connection is genuine, layered, and emotionally attached. In many cases, physical closeness becomes the gateway to feelings that have been suppressed, avoided, or hidden under layers of control. The intensity of the act, the way bodies move, the rhythm of breathing in sync, the vulnerability of being seen without armor, brings up sensations that aren't just physical, they're emotional landmines. Especially for someone who has tried to keep those feelings locked up. Intimacy isn't just closeness, it's exposure. And with that exposure comes fear. So, what does the mind do when fear meets pleasure? When desire collides with emotional truth? It backs away, it seeks safety. And for many, that safety looks like silence, withdrawal, even emotional numbness. It's not because the experience wasn't meaningful. Quite the opposite, it was too meaningful. And the weight of that meaning feels threatening. They may not even realize what they're doing. The distance isn't always a choice, it's a reflex. The result of years of conditioning to avoid vulnerability, to stay composed, to stay guarded. If you look closely, the signs are all there. Before the intimacy, they're attentive, almost over-focused. Every touch is filled with intention. Every kiss carries heat, but also restraint. Then in the middle of the act, there's a kind of desperation, not just for physical release, but for connection. For a moment where the world disappears and everything makes sense. But it's in the aftermath, when the lights are low, when bodies are still, that the shift begins. That's when their mind catches up to what their body has already admitted. That's when the reality of their emotional vulnerability hits full force. They might not say anything. They might just turn away, roll over, get up to leave, or go quiet. And if you ask what's wrong, they might brush it off. Say they're tired, say they need space. But inside there's a storm, a silent war between what they feel and what they know how to express. The truth is, love, when it sneaks up on someone who's not ready, doesn't knock politely. It kicks the door in. It dismantles defenses. It causes discomfort in places that were once tightly controlled. And sex, when fused with emotion, becomes the ultimate trigger for that discomfort.
We're someone caught in that emotional storm. The only thing they know how to do is retreat.
That retreat might be physical, pulling away from touch, avoiding eye contact, sleeping on the edge of the bed, or it might be emotional, getting distracted, acting indifferent, going cold. And here's the most paradoxical part. The deeper the love, the greater the distance might feel afterward. Because they're not pulling away from you. They're pulling away from the magnitude of what they feel for you, from the helplessness they feel when you disarm them with your touch, from the way their soul feels raw after connecting with you in ways they didn't expect to mean so much. It's a strange, painful irony that the very act meant to bring 2 people closer can sometimes create a sudden gap, but that gap is filled with unspoken truths, with all the things they're not ready to admit, that they care too much, that they're afraid of needing you, that the intimacy revealed a part of themselves they've kept hidden for far too long, and that now, with all defenses stripped, they don't know how to exist in this emotional openness without collapsing. So when you find yourself in that moment wrapped in sheets but feeling alone, don't just ask what's wrong. Ask what the silence is trying to say. Because somewhere in that distance, there is love trying to navigate fear, connection wrestling with control, and a heart that wants to surrender but doesn't know how. There's a subtle shift that happens in physical intimacy when emotions start running deeper than expected. You begin to notice that the experience is no longer centered on performance or ego. It becomes focused on you, your needs, your rhythm, your reactions. Suddenly, it's not just about release, it's about revelation. Then this shift isn't casual, it's not routine, it's a signal that emotional attachment is beginning to take root in a very specific, very private way. When someone starts investing their full attention on how to please you, when they begin tuning into the tiniest details of what makes your body react, it's often not about sexual skill, it's about emotional surrender, disguised as control. And the more intense the emotional connection becomes, the more urgent that need to please can grow. This behavior becomes especially noticeable when every touch feels like it has a deeper intention. It's not just about making you moan, it's about studying the way you breathe when something feels right. It's not just about guiding your body, it's about reading it like a map. They've been desperate to memorize. They're no longer interested in generic patterns. They want the code to you, and they work for it, not because they're trying to earn approval, but because your pleasure matters to them in ways they can't articulate. And this is where emotional intimacy fuses with physical desire in a way that feels different, intoxicating, even disorienting. You'll notice it in the way they slow down just to feel the tension wood in your muscles. You'll see it in how they adjust themselves, not out of mechanical routine, but out of focused care. The way their hands linger in places they've already memorized. The way their mouth follows your sighs like a silent conductor, waiting for cues only your body can give. That level of attentiveness isn't performative, it's protective. It's territorial. It's their way of saying, your pleasure is not just arousing to me, it's sacred. You may even catch it outside of the bedroom in the way they suddenly pay attention to your emotional states. If you're tired, stressed, or disconnected, they don't just notice, they adjust. And an intimacy resumes. It's filtered through that awareness. The act of touching you isn't driven by routine, it's wrapped in empathy. This behavior becomes amplified during moments when they're silently watching you before initiating anything at all. That pause, that moment of stillness before the first kiss or before pulling you close. It's not hesitation, it's reverence. A kind of emotional risk-taking, disguised as physical control. Their need to please you sexually becomes their outlet for all the things they cannot say out loud. They may never look you in the eye and confess emotional attachment. They may never use words like love or devotion. But their body does the talking. Their touch becomes fluent in a language of affection, vulnerability, and unspoken depth. You start to notice that their own gratification becomes secondary. The longer they can keep you in a state of pleasure, the more emotionally satisfied they feel. They may even delay their own climax, hold back, shift focus, all so they can keep feeling you respond. There's a kind of unspoken intimacy that blooms here, one that doesn't rely on declarations or grand gestures. It exists in the spaces between gasps and glances. In the stillness after the high, when they hold you longer than necessary, when they kiss your forehead, stroke your arm, or whisper something playful just to hear you laugh again. It's not just lust, it's not just desire, it's an internal emotional storm that's found its only safe outlet, your pleasure. Sometimes they'll go out of their way to ask you what you like, and not in the casual one-night stand kind of way, but in a way that almost feels sacred, as if her answers are scripture and they're studying every syllable. They don't want to guess what you want, they want to know, and once they do, they'll never forget it. You could tell them one time what drives you wild, and they'll file it away like the most precious secret they've ever been entrusted with. Even the rhythm of their passion shifts. Instead of just taking, they give. And then they give again and again. They push their own limits to see how much they can draw out of you. It's almost like your pleasure becomes the lens through which they measure their own emotional proximity. The closer you get to euphoria, the more they feel connected. The more they feel like they're merging with something they can't define but don't want to lose. And if there's ever a moment when you feel overwhelmed physically or emotionally, they pause instantly. No frustration, no confusion, just presence. They'll look at you, breathe with you, anchor you back down before proceeding. Because in that space, their job isn't just to excite you, it's to protect your vulnerability. And they do it without asking, without bragging, and without breaking the rhythm. That's the kind of behavior that doesn't scream, I'm in love, but it whispers it in every single movement. This kind of attentiveness doesn't come from physical craving alone. It comes from emotional resonance, from the kind of bond that turns sex into storytelling and desire into devotion. And while the words may never be spoken, the truth is written all over their hands, their eyes, and the way they place your pleasure at the center of their universe without even knowing they're doing it. There's a point in every connection, especially one tangled in emotional depth, where words begin to fail, language becomes too clumsy, too limited, too exposed, and when the emotions become too overwhelming to articulate, they find another outlet. In these moments, sex becomes more than desire. It becomes a language, a visceral, instinctual translation of feelings too big for sentences, the kind of feelings that choke in the throat, that stall behind pride, that hesitate out of fear of rejection. And so the body begins to speak, where the mouth cannot, the hands, the mouth, the rhythm of movement. They all begin to say what the heart is too afraid to confess. When intimacy becomes the emotional communication channel, the dynamic shifts in subtle but deeply powerful ways. You'll notice it in the way touch lingers, not just for stimulation, but for reassurance. You'll see it in the way eye contact holds too long during the act, the way silence stretches in between breaths, not as a lack of words, but as a space filled with unspoken truths. There's a tenderness, a kind of reverence in the way they undress you, not rushed, not mechanical, as though each layer removed is another wall coming down, as if seeing you completely isn't just about access to your body, but about being trusted with your vulnerability. You start to sense that every kiss is carrying weight, that the pressure of their hands isn't random, it's mapping the outline of someone they're afraid to lose. They don't just want to make love you, they want to be inside the safety of your world, and they don't say it, they don't have to, because it's there in how they breathe you in, like oxygen, in the way their forehead presses against yours, at the height of passion, in how they pause mid-movement just to study your face, like they're trying to memorize you, not for this moment, but for every moment that comes after. There's a specific kind of intensity and intimacy when it becomes the only safe place for emotional truth to live. You feel it when the sex is slow, not because of fatigue, but because of meaning. They want to stretch time, hold it, savor the seconds with you like it might be the last time. And even when the pace becomes urgent or rough, it's never detached. It's driven by something deeper, something that wants to claim, not just possess, something that doesn't know how to say, I care about you more than I'm ready to admit. So instead it says, let me show you in the only language I trust. Every movement becomes a message. Every gasp they pull from you is confirmation that you're real, that this connection isn't imagined. And the way they respond to your pleasure, the way their energy shifts when you moan, shudder, cry out, isn't just lust. It's connection. It's a desire to feel validated through your body, through your surrender, through your acceptance of them. In those moments, it's not just sex, it's emotional sinking. Their body becomes a vessel carrying love they can't yet give voice to. And then there are the in-between moments. The parts no one talks about, the way they tuck you under their arm afterward, the way they trail fingers along your spine absent-mindedly, like they're grounding themselves in your presence, the way they might not speak, but you can feel the gravity in their silence, their heartbeat against your back, their breath still syncing with yours. They may not say I'm falling for you, but their stillness does, their presence does. The refusal to let go too quickly, that's the confession. Sometimes the emotional storm is so big, they don't even know they're using intimacy to express it. They just know they crave being near you, not just for arousal, but for something softer. They see the safety of your warmth, the quiet of your touch. They feel understood when your hands are in their hair or when you rest your palm over their chest. It's not just sexual gratification, it's relief from the tension, from the pressure, from the emotional chaos they can't control in their own minds. And for those who are emotionally reserved, this kind of sexual connection becomes sacred. It's where they finally allow themselves to feel without judgment. You'll notice they often draw it out. They create moments within moments. They don't just take, they give, and they give with devotion. They read your body like a diary, like every sigh is a secret, like every shift in your tone or every flutter in your breath is telling them a story they want to know by heart. It's not just physical attraction, it's fascination. And in this intimate space, fascination becomes a form of worship. Even when they're silent, you feel it, the weight of what they're holding back, the tight grip on your hip, the protective way they wrap themselves around you, the sudden seriousness in their eyes when everything else fades away. That's love, peeking through the cracks. Not loud, not proud, but undeniably present. They don't have to say anything. Their body has already told the truth. It catches you off guard, those sharp, unexpected moments of irritation that surface right in the middle of what's supposed to feel good, peaceful, or deeply connected. 1 second, everything is flowing. The chemistry, the rhythm, the intimacy, and the next, a strange tension builds. Something small triggers a reaction that feels disproportionate. A comment lands wrong. A shift in energy changes the entire mood. And suddenly, you're navigating emotional waters that feel colder, tighter, and slightly out of reach. You're left wondering, where did that come from? The answer lies in the shadow space of love, the part few talk about, where emotional overwhelm gets translated into irritation, and where intimacy becomes both a craving and a confrontation. The truth is, when emotional depth starts to grow in a relationship, it doesn't always bring comfort. Sometimes it brings discomfort because connection forces awareness, and awareness brings vulnerability. And vulnerability, for someone non-practiced in expressing it, it can feel like danger. So when someone begins to experience deeper emotional intimacy, especially during physical closeness, it often activates old fears they don't even recognize. It's not that they're mad at you, it's that your closeness is poking at something unhealed inside them, something they've learned to protect with defensiveness, sarcasm, or a sudden emotional shutdown. You'll notice it in how their tone subtly changes when you ask a seemingly innocent question during a quiet moment, or the way their body stiffens after a particularly vulnerable sexual experience, or even how they grow distant if you touch them in a moment they weren't expecting to feel so deeply. These reactions aren't conscious, they're not malicious, they're protective, because when the emotional intensity becomes too high, and they don't know how to regulate it, the most accessible outlet becomes frustration. Annoyance becomes armor. It creates distance, and in that distance, they find temporary relief from the vulnerability that closeness brings. Sex, in particular, is an emotional amplifier. It doesn't just ignite desire, it reveals truth, and sometimes that truth is too loud. Imagine undressing not just your body, but also your guarded self, laying next to someone who sees beyond your defensive, feeling understood in ways that feel threatening, because you never gave verbal permission. That kind of exposure, especially for someone emotionally reserved, creates a paradox. They want the intimacy, but fear what it might mean. They crave the closeness, but feel unsafe in its emotional aftermath. And so their instinct is to push back, not physically, but emotionally, through mood shifts, through misdirected anger, through quiet but cutting moments where connection becomes confrontation. You may notice this particularly after moments of intense connection. The sex was deep, the eye contact was raw, your bodies weren't just joined, they were in sync. But then right when you expect tenderness or emotional softness, they turn cold. Or they make a sarcastic remark, or they go silent. It can feel like whiplash. And while your instinct might be to take it personally, what's really happening is that they're trying to get back control of emotions that suddenly feel bigger than them. In their mind, pulling away or creating friction feels safer than staying in a state of vulnerability they don't know how to handle. Even outside the bedroom, this can show up in small but revealing ways, like when they get defensive after you compliment them in a way that feels too intimate, or when they brush off a romantic gesture as too much, or when they suddenly start arguments right after a weekend that was emotionally close and drama-free. These are all signs of emotional resistance masquerading as irritation. The deeper the bond becomes, the more their nervous system goes into alert, because deep down they know what's happening. They know you're becoming someone who matters. And when someone matters, there's more to lose, more to risk, more to feel. Their sexual behavior can reflect this inner chaos too. You may notice that their style of intimacy shifts suddenly. One night deeply sensual, the next time more aggressive, almost detached. That shift isn't about losing interest. It's about trying to regulate what they're feeling. Roughness or teasing may replace tenderness, not because they don't want the emotional connection, but because it feels safer to keep it at arm's length. They'll use control or dominance to shield the part of themselves that feels too exposed. And in those moments, their irritation becomes a mask, one that hides the truth of how affected they really are by your presence, your touch, your ability to get under their emotional skin. It's not uncommon for someone to test emotional safety by pushing against it, to see if you'll leave when they get moody, to check if their emotional volatility will make you back away. They don't do this consciously, but the emotional pattern plays out all the same, because deep connection awakens old fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of being truly seen, fear of being known, and then rejected. And so they poke, they push, they provoke, not because they don't care, but because they care more than they're ready to admit, and your presence threatens their emotional autopilot. If you pay close attention during these moments of tension, you'll notice the contradiction. Their words may say one thing, but their body tells another story. The lingering touch after the argument, the way they glance at you when they think you're not looking, the way they instinctively reach for you, even after pulling away emotionally. It's not apathy, it's ambivalence, a deep internal war between their desire for connection and their fear of it. These moments of irritation aren't the end of intimacy. They're proof of its beginning, because no one gets triggered by someone they don't emotionally invest in. And when the body starts craving what the heart refuses name, that friction becomes inevitable. You become the mirror. And when you reflect something too real, too intimate, too close to home, it's not rejection. You see, it's a heart on the edge of emotional surrender, wrapped in resistance. It hasn't learned how to drop. There's something quietly magnetic about being watched, not in the obvious performative way, but in those moments when you catch someone noticing you, when they think you're unaware. That kind of gaze carries a different weight. It's not about lust. It's not about possession. It's about attention, focused, deliberate, and deeply emotional. In intimate relationships, especially where love is growing quietly, this silent observation becomes a major clue, because not everyone expresses affection with words, and not everyone shows devotion with grand gestures. Some show it by watching, by listening, by taking in every detail. When you're most unguarded, in fact, the strongest emotional attachments often reveal themselves not in what someone says or does directly, but in how they witness you completely and without demand. You may notice it in the way their eyes trace you across a room when you're not even interacting, or how they watch the way your lips move when you talk about something you're passionate about. It's in the way they memorize your routines, how they know the exact way you brush your hair back, or the way your mood changes when you're tired. These aren't conscious efforts, they're instinctive reactions born from emotional pull, and when someone is secretly in love, this observational behavior intensifies, especially during moments of vulnerability and intimacy. In the bedroom, it becomes even more pronounced. When emotional closeness deepens, physical intimacy becomes less about act and more about awareness. You begin to feel their gaze not just as something that arouses, but something that understands. They're not just watching your body, they're watching your response. They study the way your breathing changes under their touch. They remember how your hips tilt when you're getting close. They pick up on the smallest changes, your rhythm, your tone, the way you hold their face or wrap your legs, and use that as a silent compass. That kind of observation is not about technique, it's about emotional presence. It says, I'm not just here for me, I'm fully here for you. This is the kind of behavior that often goes unnoticed unless you know how to look for it. It doesn't demand the spotlight. It doesn't need applause. It's subtle, sometimes almost shy, but it's powerful. Because when someone chooses to remain in the background, not because they're distant, but because they're present in a quiet, protective way, they're communicating something incredibly intimate. They see you in your softness, in your power, in your contradictions. And rather than trying to change you or rush you, they observe, they adapt, they remember. Outside of sex, this kind of emotional watchfulness still pulses under the surface. They'll notice the way your energy shifts when you're overwhelmed, and without asking, they'll create space. They won't need breadits about your comfort zones. They've already noted them. The people who feel the most but say the least often become the ones who anchor relationships in subtle ways. They'll know when not to touch you even before you speak. They'll sense when a kiss on your shoulder is more needed than 1,000 words. This is the energy of someone who is deeply connected, even when their emotions are hidden behind layers of silence. There's a hook hidden in all of this, because for someone who's falling deeply but secretly, the observation becomes a lifeline. It's how they stay close without crossing the emotional thresholds. They fear. Watching you is safe. Listening to you breathe after sex is safe. Tracing your face with their eyes while you sleep is safe. Saying I love you might feel terrifying, but showing up silently that they can do, that they need to do, because being close, even without acknowledgement, helps them process the very emotions they can't bring themselves to voice. They become emotionally fluent in the way they learn you. They'll know your stress tells, the way your fingers twitch when you're distracted, how you pace when you're trying to solve a problem. They'll recognize when you're faking a smile, and they'll hold that truth without forcing you to explain. And in the bedroom, that fluency reaches another level. You'll find that they touch you with precision not because they've been told, but because they've noticed. They'll know which side of your neck makes your breath hitch. They'll find patterns in your pleasure and move with them like a dance choreographed entirely around you. That is not casual desire. That is emotional imprinting. Sometimes this depth of presence can feel almost ghost-like. It's not always loud or intense. They may not say much after intimacy. They may not ask for validation, but they will always be there quietly, steadily, in the background. Their love doesn't need center stage because it's not driven by ego. It's driven by connection. And for people who are afraid of being emotionally exposed, this quiet love becomes their most honest confession. They won't put it into words, but they'll hold you a little longer when you think they're asleep. They'll pull the blanket up over your shoulders. They'll memorize the way your voice sounds when you say their name. And they'll carry those moments like sacred data because they don't know how to give you their heart fully, but they're already giving you their attention. In relationships rooted in quiet observation, intimacy becomes an echo. Every small detail becomes a memory. Every shared silence becomes a message. And when you begin to feel seen, not just physically but emotionally, you'll start to realize that this kind of attention is far more powerful than anything shouted from rooftops. It's a devotion wrapped in stillness, a love letter written in eye contact and fingertips, in the weight of someone choosing to stay present, not loudly but completely. There's a strange twist that happens when emotional closeness begins to feel too real, too raw, too consuming. Just when everything seems to be deepening, when the intimacy feels more secure, the rhythm feels more connected, and vulnerability is finally being exchanged without resistance, something suddenly shifts. Instead of leaning into the bond, instead of celebrating the growing closeness, the energy changes. Tension builds. Emotional sabotage creeps in, disguised as casual detachment, unnecessary arguments, or pulling away without explanation, and what once felt soft and certain now feels unstable. This kind of emotional sabotage isn't about cruelty. It's a defense mechanism. It's a hidden reaction to the terrifying realization this is real, and that means it can be lost. When someone who is deeply invested emotionally yet emotionally unprepared for the intensity of that connection begins to fall in love, the experience can feel more threatening than comforting. Their instinct might not be to hold tighter, but to test the limits, to create emotional chaos, to see how safe they really are in this intimacy. The irony is heavy. They crave closeness, but the fear of being emotionally consumed by it makes them push it away, just as it begins to feel permanent. This is where sabotage becomes seductive. It provides control in a space where they suddenly feel emotionally exposed. In the physical realm, this emotional push-pull often gets amplified. The bedroom becomes the battleground of what they won't dare say. Their passion may intensify, but so does their unpredictability. One night they're fully present, reading your body like it's their favorite poem. The next, they're distant, going through the motions without connection. They touch you, but something's off. They may initiate intimacy in a way that feels more about dominance or release than connection. Not because their desire has faded, but because they're wrestling with the vulnerability, the last deep moment left behind. When sex becomes a gateway to emotional truth, they might subconsciously choose to dilute that truth, to protect themselves from feeling too deeply again. You can feel the sabotage in how their eyes avoid yours during intimacy, how the pace changes, not naturally but with intention, as if they're trying to steer the experience away from the emotional. They may suddenly crack a joke when things get too soft, or shift positions when you begin to lose yourself in the moment. These are not random moves, they're emotionally calculated maneuvers. If they stay in the vulnerability too long, they begin to feel exposed. So instead, they stir the water, they disrupt the flow. They take something that was leading toward emotional transparency and inject just enough friction to create emotional distance. Outside of sex, the pattern continues. Arguments begin out of nowhere. Misunderstandings feel intentionally stretched. They get colder when you get warmer. They dismiss or devalue what you share. They test you, and not in the obvious way, in the subtle, unsettling ways that leave you questioning your emotional footing. You might catch them pushing buttons they know will hurt. You might find yourself confused as to how a beautiful moment unraveled so fast. This is where emotional sabotage becomes difficult to name, because it's not always dramatic. Often it's quiet, a little colder than usual, a little less affectionate, a little more careless with your feelings. But underneath all of it is an emotional truth too powerful to be spoken directly. They care more than they're ready to handle. In many cases, their body betrays them even when their behavior doesn't. Their hands still linger, their eyes still find you when they think you're not looking. They still know your pleasure spots, still respond to your voice, still get pulled toward your energy like a magnet, but then they act as if none of that matters. They disconnect, they get distant, they pretend to feel less than they do. This dissonance is not because they're playing games, it's because they're emotionally overwhelmed. And when love meets unresolved fear, the result is emotional sabotage cloaked in silence, sarcasm, or inconsistency. Sometimes they'll even manufacture a scenario that threatens the relationship, flirting with detachment, making you feel less secure, stirring just enough drama to create emotional static. Not because they want to lose you, but because they're afraid of how much they already feel they need you. If you walk away, it hurts less if they can say it was their fault. If they push first, they don't have to face the terror of abandonment. It's twisted logic, but for a heart trained in self-protection, it feels safer to ruin something than to risk watching it fall apart unexpectedly. In the bedroom, this emotional conflict becomes a quiet storm. One night you feel worshipped, like every part of you is sacred. The next, you feel like a stranger. Their touch changes, their breathing isn't in sync, their rhythm becomes more about control than communion. And yet, in the aftermath, when the room goes still and the lights go low, they still reach for you, still hold your waist, still pull you close in sleep. These contradictions are not evidence of emotional confusion. They are evidence of emotional overload. They are caught between the pull of genuine love and the fear of its power to dismantle them. You may sense it when their aftercare becomes mechanical, or when they fall silent where softness used to be. You might even see it in their eyes, the way they study you as if deciding whether they can survive the intimacy they just created. There's a moment after sex, especially the kind that peels back all emotional layers, where their silence speaks volumes. That silence isn't detachment, it's them standing in the wreckage of their emotional walls, trying to build them back up before you notice just how exposed they've become. The hook in all of this is subtle, but piercing. The deeper the intimacy grows, the more violently the sabotage may appear, because they know, whether consciously or not, that you've become the person who sees them, truly sees them. And when someone starts to see too much, the person being seen often panics. They retreat, they build walls, they throw emotional grenades, not to end the connection, but to create enough distance to feel safe again. It's not rejection, it's emotional retreat. And the sabotage is just the smoke screen.